Dr. Michael Adams was the kind of man you would trust with your life. Tall, with sharp features and a calm demeanor, he exuded a quiet confidence that made every patient feel like they were in capable hands. His reputation as a compassionate, highly skilled doctor had spread across the community like wildfire. But there was something more to him, something about his past that he kept hidden, something only a select few ever glimpsed. It was his first day at Mapleview General Hospital, and Dr. Adams was introduced to the staff as the new cardiologist. A fresh face, but one that seemed oddly familiar, though none of the nurses could quite place it. His name was on the lips of every patient, each one eager to see the new doctor who had so quickly earned a stellar reputation. But behind his quiet smile, behind his reassuring voice, Dr. Adams had secrets. Secrets that not only had the potential to unravel his entire career, but also the lives of those who trusted him most. Dr. Adams had always been a man of few words. He was professional, efficient, and well-liked by his patients. However, there were moments, fleeting seconds where his eyes would momentarily dart to something in the room or out the window, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. It was as if he was haunted by something. On his second day, Dr. Adams was examining a patient named Sarah Caldwell. Sarah was a mother of two, a kind woman with a heart of gold, who had been struggling with severe chest pain for weeks. After multiple tests, doctors had failed to find a diagnosis. Yet, Dr. Adams, who had been newly assigned to her case, seemed to read her like an open book. As he sat down to discuss her condition, he looked her in the eye, the slightest tremor in his hand as he adjusted his glasses. "Sarah, I believe you're suffering from an undiagnosed heart condition. We'll start a course of treatment, but there's something I want you to keep in mind. If I recommend a procedure or a test, trust that I've seen this before," he said calmly. Sarah smiled back at him, appreciating the care he seemed to show. "I've been to so many doctors, Dr. Adams. You're the first one who actually listens to me. Thank you." But as Sarah left his office that day, she couldn't shake the odd feeling that lingered in the back of her mind. Dr. Adams had been comforting, sure, but his eyes. There was something in his eyes that felt off. It was as if they held a sorrowful secret, something too heavy for words. Weeks passed, and Dr. Adams' secret began to take root in the back of his mind. Despite his outward appearance of control, a creeping fear had taken hold of him. One evening, after a long shift, Dr. Adams walked into his office, his mind racing. He was supposed to be home, but he couldn't bring himself to leave the hospital. Not yet. In his desk drawer, hidden beneath papers, was an old, worn envelope. He hesitated for a moment before pulling it out. It was a letter that he had written to himself years ago, a letter he had never intended for anyone else to see. "Michael," it began, written in a scrawl that seemed so unlike his usual neat handwriting. "You're going to be tested. You'll be asked to do things that may challenge your moral compass, things you never thought you'd be capable of. You're not the man you once were, but you can't let them see. You must continue the facade." Things took a dark turn when Dr. Adams was called to a late-night emergency. A patient had been brought in with severe internal bleeding, and his heart was failing. It wasn't a case Dr. Adams wanted to deal with, but his reputation and skill made him the best option. As he entered the operating room, he was shocked to find that the patient on the table was none other than Richard Turner, a man whose name had haunted him for years. Richard had been a close friend back in medical school. In fact, they had shared a bond that went beyond friendship. They had both trained under the same mentor, but Richard had disappeared from Dr. Adams' life after a tragic incident. A mistake that Michael had made. As Dr. Adams worked to save Richard's life, his hands trembled, not from the medical procedure, but from the flood of memories rushing back. The weight of what he had done to his friend all those years ago loomed over him. Richard had been a rising star in cardiology, just like Michael, until one night a decision had been made in the heat of the moment. A decision that had ruined both of their careers. Dr. Adams had chosen to cover up the accident, to hide the truth of what had happened. And Richard, with his unshakable integrity, had walked away from the field, disappearing without a trace. Now, here Richard was, unconscious on the operating table, a shadow of the man he once was. Dr. Adams knew he could never come clean. If Richard woke up and remembered, it would destroy everything he had worked for. His entire career would be in jeopardy, and worse, his reputation as a compassionate doctor would be shattered. Richard survived the surgery, but his condition remained critical. Dr. Adams visited him daily, watching over his recovery with an almost obsessive intensity. He couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at his insides. He knew he needed to confess, to unburden himself before the weight of his actions consumed him. One afternoon, as he sat beside Richard's bed, watching him stir from his sedatives, the words came out before he could stop them. "I'm sorry," Dr. Adams said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry for what I did to you. It was a mistake, and I've been carrying it with me all these years. I never meant to hurt you, Richard. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just protecting myself. I was selfish." Richard's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in years, their eyes locked. Dr. Adams braced for anger, for accusations, but instead, Richard just stared at him, his expression unreadable. "You made your choice, Michael," Richard whispered, his voice weak. "You have to live with it, but I don't want your apology. I never needed it." The silence that followed was thick with years of unspoken words. Dr. Adams felt the weight of Richard's gaze. His own shame reflected back at him. It was only a matter of time before the truth would come crashing down on Dr. Adams. Richard, now recovering, became an unlikely ally in the investigation that followed. When Richard had woken up and learned of the situation, he knew the world had to know the truth. One evening, after another long shift, Dr. Adams received a phone call from the hospital administrator. Richard had made a statement. He was going public with what had happened. The news spread quickly, and before long, a formal investigation was launched into Dr. Adams' past decisions, especially the one that had nearly cost Richard his life. Dr. Adams knew the moment had come. The facade he had built over the years was crumbling. His secret was out. But the weight of his guilt was no longer the only thing that burdened him. The consequences of his actions were now more real than ever before. The hospital was in turmoil the day the news broke. Dr. Michael Adams, the trusted, highly respected cardiologist, was now the subject of an investigation that threatened to bring down not just his career but the reputation of Mapleview General Hospital. The once revered doctor, who had saved countless lives, now stood on the edge of losing everything. His secrets were out, and the truth was too much to ignore. Rachel, the head nurse who had worked alongside him for years, had always admired Dr. Adams for his calm demeanor and professionalism. But as she stood in the hallway, listening to the hushed conversations of her colleagues, she felt a mix of disbelief and betrayal. The man she had trusted had been hiding a dark past. The news that Richard Turner, the man he had wronged so many years ago, was now speaking out, shook her to the core. Rachel had seen the toll this was taking on Dr. Adams. His usually composed face was drawn, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She knew that he was struggling, but the weight of his guilt was written all over him. She tried to speak with him, tried to comfort him, but he was unreachable, a shadow of the man he had once been. "I never meant for it to go this far," Dr. Adams confessed one night after his shift, his voice barely audible. "I thought I was protecting Richard, but I was just protecting myself. I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything I had worked for." Rachel looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and anger. "You've built your life on lies, Michael. You've hurt people, but now you have to face the consequences. You can't keep running from it." Dr. Adams didn't respond. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the floor, as if the weight of his past mistakes was finally sinking in. The walls he had built around himself were crumbling piece by piece. The truth had a way of doing that, exposing the cracks in even the most carefully constructed facades. The investigation was thorough. Richard Turner, despite his pain, was relentless in his pursuit of justice. He worked closely with the hospital administrators and legal teams, piecing together the story of what had happened all those years ago. The details of that night, the night that had altered both his and Dr. Adams' lives, came to light, and every small piece of the puzzle made the picture clearer. Richard's testimony was gut-wrenching. He spoke of the moment he had been betrayed, the decision that had changed everything. As the trial began, the courtroom was packed with onlookers. Hospital staff, reporters, and even former patients who had once trusted Dr. Adams with their lives. Now they wanted answers. They wanted to know how the man they had relied on could have made such a devastating mistake. Dr. Adams sat in the courtroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the stares on him, the judgment, the disappointment. His hands trembled as he listened to Richard's voice, recounting the moment that had destroyed their friendship and nearly cost both of them everything. The legal battle was fierce, with Dr. Adams' defense team trying to salvage his reputation, but the facts were undeniable. There was no way to hide the truth. His decision to cover up the incident years ago was too serious, too damaging. His career, built on trust and dedication, was now in jeopardy. But the truth was more than just about legalities. It was about the people whose lives had been touched by Dr. Adams, both the ones he had saved and those he had hurt. The weight of his past mistakes was not just felt by him, but by the entire hospital, by every patient who had ever placed their trust in him. Dr. Adams sat in his office, staring at the framed photograph of his family on his desk. His wife, his children, they had no idea what he had done, what he had been hiding. They saw him as a hero, a dedicated doctor, a man of honor. But now his secrets were out, and he knew the damage they would cause. He thought about the sacrifices he had made for his family, the long hours at the hospital, the years of hard work that had gone into building his career. He had done it all for them, for the future. But now, as he looked at his family's smiling faces, he realized that none of that mattered. He had betrayed the very people he had sworn to protect. The knock at the door broke his train of thought. It was Rachel. She had been avoiding him ever since the trial began. But now, she stood in his doorway, her expression unreadable. "Michael," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of sorrow and resolve. "It's time. You can't keep running. You need to face this, not just for you, but for everyone you've hurt." Dr. Adams didn't answer. He simply nodded, knowing deep down that Rachel was right. The truth couldn't be avoided anymore. He had to take responsibility for what he had done. In the months following the trial, Dr. Adams began the long, difficult journey of redemption. He resigned from Mapleview General Hospital, his license temporarily suspended while he underwent counseling and therapy to address the trauma that had led him down the dark path of deception. It was a humbling experience, one that required him to confront the parts of himself that he had tried to bury for so long. But through the support of his family and a renewed sense of accountability, Dr. Adams began to rebuild his life from the ground up. He became involved in advocating for ethical practices in medicine, using his story to highlight the importance of honesty, integrity, and transparency in healthcare. He spoke at conferences, sharing the lessons he had learned from his mistakes and encouraging others to prioritize their patients above all else. As for Richard, their relationship remained strained. Though Richard had forgiven him, the wounds of the past were too deep to heal quickly. But as time went on, and as Dr. Adams continued to prove his commitment to change, they began to rebuild their fractured friendship, one step at a time. Years passed, and Dr. Adams was able to regain his medical license. But his role in the medical field was no longer the same. He no longer took his work for granted, no longer saw himself as above reproach. He had become a different man, one who valued his patients more than his career, one who had learned that the true measure of a doctor was not in his skill, but in his integrity. Rachel, who had supported him through it all, remained by his side. Though their professional relationship had ended, their bond had strengthened. Together, they had witnessed the transformation of a man who had once been lost, but who had found his way back through humility and a commitment to change. Dr. Adams knew that the road to redemption was long, but as he stood in front of a group of new medical students, sharing his story, he knew that he had made the right choice. His mistakes had been painful, but they had led him to this moment, teaching a new generation of doctors the importance of ethics, integrity, and putting patients first. "My story is not one of heroism," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. It's a story of failure, of making a choice that cost me everything. But it's also a story of redemption. And that's the lesson I want you to take with you. Never forget that the trust of your patients is more valuable than anything else. As the students absorbed his words, Dr. Adams felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had finally found his redemption, not in his career, but in the lesson he had learned, the lesson that would be his true legacy.